One Piece, the lengthy tale about a young man named Luffy and his dreams of becoming the king of the pirates. It's a story that's 1100 chapters and still going to this day, but I'm proud to say that I'm now 100 chapters deep. This video will be the second in my series of reviews. We'll be covering chapters 69 through 100, Arlong Park and Loguetown. Just like last time, I'll talk about what I loved, what I didn't love, my predictions, and even some things that I got wrong. Before we get too far into the video, I want to take a moment to thank my channel members. Y'all help allow me to keep making these videos and share my rekindled love of manga. Thank you for your continued support and choosing to support me. It means a lot. This video shout out goes to Art Hammond. Thank you for being a member and always supporting me at streams. I really do appreciate you. If you'd like to be a member and possibly get a shout out, check out the join button down below. I also want to take a moment to apologize for the large gap between review 1 and review 2. I'm hoping to make those gaps shorter. I did actually just finish my script for 3. I had recorded this a while ago and I just got around to editing it now, but thank you guys for your patience, and I'm hoping to make these videos be a lot closer together now. With that settled, let's begin Jotpla's One Piece review part 2. Arlong Park to Loguetown. Arlong Park, considered by many to be one of the strongest parts of early One Piece. I was told multiple times that if I didn't like One Piece by the end of Arlong Park, then I likely wouldn't enjoy the rest of the series. Luckily, I was already on board, pun intended, by the time the Straw Hats hit Baratie. So this wasn't a test of my enjoyment, but rather securing my beliefs that Oda would perfect his craft with each new section of story. There's a fair bit to break down with Arlong Park, so maybe it's best to start with the Fishman himself, Arlong. On Luffy's journey to Arlong Park, Yosoku starts to give a history lesson about the 7 warlords, a group of government-recognized pirate leaders who are allowed to do as they please as long as they return a cut of their haul to the government. Yosoku tells us that Mihawk is a warlord, which I guess isn't too surprising because he is powerful as fuck. He also talks about a fishman named Jinbei, the leader of the Fishman pirates. Yosoku begins to tell us about how Arlong used to be an equal to Jinbei, and then Luffy quickly distracts him, which cuts off the conversation. Considering we've seen the power of Mihawk, I can only imagine how terrifying Jinbei could be, and if Arlong was considered to be an equal to that means he had to be pretty fucking scary. When we first meet Saw-tooth Arlong, he's having a business conversation with Nezumi, a naval officer stopping by for his money. Arlong pleads with him to stay around for a bit and share a drink with him, and gives him the line, "I don't much like human males, but you're not bad. You and I speak the same language." Arlong, of course, isn't speaking about a shared verbal communication, but that they both speak money. They see eye to eye on the concepts of power and greed, and when we learn how that money is extorted from the neighboring villages, it paints the full picture that Arlong is almost like a corrupt king looking to take whatever he can for his personal gain. Money is good. It's the only thing a man can really believe in. Arlong believes this, truly. Money can buy anyone power, man or fishman alike. It doesn't matter who or what you are, but with enough of it, you can bend the will of the world. This is fairly similar to Don Krieg's view of the world, focus on building power through artificial means. If they aren't personally strong enough, they'll get some money and just buy that new strength. Though at least in the case of Arlong, at least he's naturally strong and doesn't need a bunch of shiny toys to back up his might. Kind of. Arlong has it built up in his mind that fishmen are superior to humans, that they've evolved past normal men. We fishmen are evolved humans who have developed the ability to breathe seawater. Our fish-like powers make us superior to you. We fishmen are the lords of all creation. A human fighting the fishmen is fighting the power of nature itself. Arlong is all about the fishmen embracing their oddities and uses the power this newer breed of species has been gifted to extort anyone unlike them. I'm just gonna spitball a bit here, and assume that maybe the fishmen as a whole had a history of being mistreated. Some sort of event in the history of fishmen must have made them feel as if they needed to rise up against anyone that was different to them, that they would opt to make anyone feel lesser before they could do the same to them. If people are going to fear you for your differences, Arlong was to take these ideas and make them truly fear them in ways that they could never comprehend. Arlong's band of fishmen are all about embracing this fear as a major tool. No need to fear if you're controlling the fear. Utilizing this weaponized fear allowed Arlong and his band of fishmen to extort Kokoyashi and Gosa. After seeing what the Fishmen did to Gosa, it's very easy to see how Arlong held these villages in an 8-year chokehold. The biggest reason I see the potential for a future plot explanation where the Fishmen were a target of oppression is because it's giving me the similar feeling to some of the Gundam content that takes place in Universal Century. A very brief rundown is that in Gundam, the Earth was starting to degrade in such a fashion that the human race needed to start sending folks to live on space colonies. Humans born on and living on Earth are referred to as Earthnoids, while humans who live and were born in space are referred to as Spacenoids. A clear divide between the people of Earth and the people of space colonies would flare up, and there's a whole thing about classism and stuff like that, but the main point here is that eventually the people of space would start to see qualities of evolution. It wasn't super common at first, but this led to a brand new type of human evolution, the new type. The shortest explanation I could give is that a new type is a human with all sorts of psychic abilities, inhuman reactions, etc. They're basically just human 2.0. Eventually, the Earth Federation would begin to see new types as a threat and did their best to hunt them down and exterminate them out of existence, and of course it led to a lot of hatred and bloodshed. Maybe I'm seeing more potential here than there actually is, but it was really hard to not see the Fishmen in the same light as the new types from Gundam. I also just really like Gundam, so anytime I can compare something to it, I'm gonna fucking do it. Coming back to Arlong though, Arlong was a lot like the new types. He was going to make his own future, even if folks told him he shouldn't exist. And what better way of making that happen than taking the very thing they need to survive? Money. It's a long con, but I think if Luffy and the crew would have never shown up, this could have gone on for far longer. If someone didn't pay up, they'd just kill him and open up shop on some other unsuspecting village. Arlong is exactly the cold-hearted son of a bitch I was hoping he'd be. I know we're supposed to really hate Arlong because he's a heartless prick, but I really like him. Arlong is the first villain in One Piece where I could really see the future vision. I really hope to see him again because man did I learn a harsh lesson about doubting the comeback of characters already, and we're only 100 chapters in, but we'll come back to that a bit later. With the arrival of Arlong in the story, we also get something I had a feeling we'd get to see soon. Nami's backstory. I gotta wonder what reading this arc was like in real time at the time of publishing because man, the whole reveal that Nami was actually working for Arlong had to be super fucking powerful. Having to wait for the reveal that she was actually just doing it to save her village must have felt like nails on a chalkboard. I don't think reading it in the binge format that I've been consuming ruined it, but it's fun to imagine how it might have felt for folks back in the day. Given everything we'd experienced with Nami up to this point, it was hard to see her just turning into a cold witch all of a sudden. And with Zoro testing her fairly early on by throwing himself to the water, it was 1-to-1 with the strength of her character we witnessed during the buggy encounter. Nami has her goals, but she would never, ever want to hurt anyone that paid her in actual kindness. Meeting Luffy and the boys must have felt like waking up to a cold splash of water in the face. She's going through the highest degree of shock because she knows that she can't let anyone get close to her, or they might face the same consequences that Belmare faced 8 years ago. Thankfully, the Straw Hat boys are stubborn as fuck and see Nami for who she really is. Nami would only break the cold shoulder act when Nezumi would push her to her absolute limits. Only then, when she realized Arlong was behind everything, did she admit to needing Luffy's help. Luffy giving Nami the hat as he went to fight Arlong was the biggest sign of comfort and respect he could offer. It's almost like a big ass hug that just says, hey dude, don't worry about shit, you're stuck with me until the end. Nami might be the master of thieving and navigation, but I think she has one of the biggest hearts in the crew. I think the entire crew is pretty good about this, but I'm glad to see that Nami's situation in Arlong Park confirms this. She's almost like a pirate Robin Hood, though I doubt she'll always be as generous as she was with Kokoyashi. Belmare, as seen in the flashbacks, was such a good example of people changing over time. She left Kokoyashi as a troublemaker and came back with a new mindset, looking to become the best parent she could be to Nami and Nojiko. And the values that Belmare instilled in Nami and Nojiko are still going strong to this day, and I think Belmare would be proud of the women they became. Arlong's bullshit tax of 50,000 berries per child and 100,000 per adult could have created a lot more casualties. But Nami witnessing Belmare's sacrifice would set her on the path to make her own sacrifices to ensure that they would lose no one else. Everything Nami did was in honor of Belmare's strength. It's unfortunate that Nami would ever have to deal with this trauma. Even as a kid, she had to bear the weight of the world on her shoulders and keep a straight face to sell her role. Belmare would have done the same, and that's even apparent in the dinner flashback where she refuses to eat so that the girls can have a real meal. She would do anything to protect the ones she loved, no matter the cost. I talked a lot about the various mentorships in my part 1 review, and it was great to see that Nami's mentor would not disappoint me. I'd really love to see more flashbacks of her in the future, but I know the point of her flashbacks are to sell Nami, so I'm not going to hold my breath. Now to talk about the main event of Arlong Park, the Straw Hats versus the Fishmen. Zoro versus Hachi, Sanji versus Kurobe, Usopp versus Shu, and of course, Luffy versus Arlong. The overall fight is honestly really kind of boring. Luffy gets incapacitated and goes through a few chapters of getting CPR while the gang fights off their respective foes. Zoro versus Hachi would have been done a lot quicker if Zoro wasn't still nerfed from his wounds against Mihawk. Though I do love some of the dialogue during this section. Hachi talks about the fact that he must be more powerful because he has 6 swords. Zoro responds by telling him that Hachi's blades are much lighter than his. This isn't just about physical weight, but more about the emotional weight behind Zoro's swords. Zoro has a more important reason for fighting, which gives him the stronger heart in this case. But like I said, Hachi was fighting a pretty nerfed Zoro. Sanji versus Kurobe is just a game of cat and mouse where Sanji is doing his best to make it into the water to save Luffy and break that goddamn rock. But instead he spends more time fighting for oxygen than he does actually fighting Kurobe. Thankfully, Sanji figures out he can just hit the guy with the massive crit by blowing into his gills and using a bunch of French attacks that I'm never gonna fucking remember. Good stuff though, because he really did get that rock broken. Usopp versus Chu is just kinda there. If anything, it serves the reader the fact that Usopp needs to stop being the biggest pussy of the crew and actually fight for a change. This isn't a bad thing, I just think it adds more to Usopp's goal of needing to become a brave sea warrior. It just feels kinda weird that everyone has these huge ambitions and then Usopp is kinda just the fucking lion from the Wizard of Oz. I'm sure bro's gonna get there, but he does get points for disarming Chu, so he wasn't entirely useless here. Now we can talk about the best part. Luffy versus Arlong. When Luffy is finally released from the water, he comes in at full speed. He tells Zoro to get fucked and throws his ass out of the way like a Nerf football. The overall fight between Luffy and Arlong is just average fare at first, trading blows, figuring out weaknesses, and playing with Arlong's teeth, just standard goofy shit. Luffy also really gives a great speech about all the things he can't do, but how it doesn't matter because he has friends to help him in times of need, just like he would do for them. It's a very Mighty Ducks moment and I was living for it. Arlong might be tough, but those ducks fly together. But where this fight takes its biggest climb in quality is when Luffy and Arlong end up in Nami's cartography room. Luffy sees this room and realizes the weight of Arlong's actions against Nami, trapping her in this room, forcing her to draw against her will and isolating her from the world in an attempt to extort her for her abilities. Arlong doesn't see Nami as a friend. He sees her as a tool for his greatest purpose, and that's it. Admitting that Nami was nothing more than something to be used was the greatest mistake he could have made against Luffy, because we've already seen how Luffy handles injustices towards people he just met, but now we've seen someone Luffy gives a shit about get the raw end of a deal. Odds are they're probably gonna end up eating dinner through a straw when he's done with them. Luffy, with all of his heart packed into his fists, sends Arlong through the Arlong Park Tower. Luffy wasn't just defeating Arlong, he was defeating a regime of oppression. What makes this moment so powerful isn't the actual fight, but the message behind Luffy's fists. The icing on the cake is when Luffy climbs up from the rubble and tells Nami, "You're one of us now," to which Nami tearfully agrees. It's like, god damn, just when you think One Piece could calm down on the emotional content, there's another moment waiting to punch you right in the fucking face. Oda is not the type of mangaka that you can let your guard down around, and I am quickly learning that. After the festivities with Kokoyashi, the greatest celebration is seeing the entire early crew together on the Going Merry for the first time, all doing their thing. It's really refreshing after getting blasted with the Kokoyashi trauma cannon. But don't worry, because Oda had more surprises ready to uppercut me. While the Straw Hats are on their voyage to Loguetown, we're treated with a few different events. The Navy's discussion about Luffy and how high his bounty should be, thanks to that rodent fuck Nezumi. The reaction from the crew when they find out they're wanted in the paper, and my favorite, Mihawk telling Shanks about his run-in with the boy you described to me long ago. Shanks, with the pride of a father who just watched his son hit his first home run, calls for a celebration. I'm so glad we got to see Shanks again so soon. Now I just really want Luffy to meet him again. We also get a cut back to Windmill Village where Makino and the mayor react to Luffy's newfound wanted status as a pirate. The mayor is visibly upset that his village is now the home of a criminal, and Makino asks, "But it was his dream. Are you worried?" To which the mayor responds, "His dream? Or his destiny?" When you take this quote and pair it with the idea that Loguetown is the town of the beginning and the end, Loguetown really does feel like a meeting of fate for Luffy and the Straw Hats. All of the Straw Hats have their errands in Loguetown, some more important than others. What I would consider to be the lesser errands is like Nami going clothes shopping, Usopp buying eggs, and Sanji buying a big-ass fish. Zoro's errands might not seem like much, but seeing as he needs 3 swords to be truly effective, going to see a sword dealer is pretty important. On Zoro's stroll through Loguetown, he runs into a lady swordsman named Tashigi that has a striking resemblance to his childhood rival, Kuina. Later in the day, Zoro ends up at the sword dealer, and if fate would have it, Tashigi strolls in eventually too. We learn a lot about swords thanks to her, and we learn that Zoro's main sword that survived the battle with Mihawk is the legendary blade Wado Ichimonji, the Straight Road of Peace. Zoro doesn't really have the bread to spend on top-tier swords, and he digs through the bargain bin for 2 blades to complement his signature 3-sword fighting style. Tashigi and Zoro have a conversation about swords and the evil that mankind chooses to do with them. Tashigi talks about how all the famous swords belong to garbage human beings, and that the blades must be crying from the sins they are forced to commit. Kinda sounds like Chihiro from Kagurabachi, doesn't it? Zoro says that there's probably a good reason for this, as a man has to do what he can to eat in these hard times. Zoro, of course, isn't speaking just about money, but the fact that it's easy to judge someone's circumstance for fighting when you truly don't know them. Tashigi speaks poorly of Zoro by name and doesn't even realize that she's speaking to him, meaning that she's only judging him by his name when the content of his character is someone that she feels she can confide in. Tashigi explains her goals to reclaim every famous blade that has fallen into the hands of evil men throughout the world. Using her own blade, the Autumn Rain, she'll hone her abilities as a swordsman and enact her own brand of justice. Zoro asks if she plans to collect his sword as well. She panics and talks about how she doesn't want his sword, she just doesn't want evil men to have them. Tashigi then points out a blade known as Kitetsu III. Zoro is quick to point out that it's bewitched. He's never heard of it, but he just knows it from picking it up. The shopkeeper interjects and explains the history of the Kitetsu blade line. Every sword that shared this name were great blades, but they came at the cost of being cursed. The shopkeeper warns that famous swordsmen have died tragic deaths for wielding these blades, and that no one in the world currently uses them because, they wouldn't be around for too long. Zoro, in one of the most badass displays possible, says fuck that, and throws the sword up in the air to see if it would wound him before landing. The sword misses and he takes it as fate that it's meant to be his sword. He still needs one more blade though, to which the shopkeeper offers him the Yubashiri, otherwise known as Snow Chaser. So impressed with Zoro's knowledge and respect of blades, the shopkeeper tells him to take the blades for free as an apology for trying to trick him earlier. The shopkeeper talks about how he hasn't looked a real swordsman in the eye in such a long time, and that he will continue to pray for his good fortune. A swordsman is only as good as the blade that chooses him. Like Tashigi incorrectly judging Zoro, swordsmen of history were quick to misunderstand the Kitetsu blades. It's almost like we judged a book by a cover, but we never considered that the book could actually be judging us, and we just didn't pass the test. In a weird way, I feel like this isn't just about swords, but almost a comparison to how Luffy judged each person before asking them to become a part of his crew. He saw through their appearance and actions and was able to view the real contents of their character. Shit man, if Luffy believed everything that the village had to say about Usopp, he'd probably never have been a part of the crew. But Luffy was able to see the true contents of his character, just like the Kitetsu sees the true strength of Zoro. Maybe it isn't that deep, but I'm gonna act like it is. Luffy's errands were a little more touristy. He wasn't going shopping or preparing. He was there to see one thing and one thing only: the stand where Gold Roger was executed. In the town square, Luffy climbs up on top of the scaffolding and takes a moment to admire the view that Gold Roger would have seen moments before his execution. For Luffy, this is about honoring the previous king of the pirates and respecting the path he would have traveled. While Luffy basks in the glory of witnessing this historic location, a beautiful, mysterious lady appears and begins to share an experience she had with Luffy, to which Luffy really has zero idea who the fuck she is. Now, before we talk about who she is, I think it's important to explain how wild my reaction was. Up until this moment, we'd only seen this character in the various cover page stories. You know, the ones with Buggy looking to reunite with his limbs, and even the battle between Kabaji and Moji for who would become the new captain of Buggy's crew. In Buggy's stories, though, we'd seen this lady and we didn't know her name. So I started jokingly referring to her as the Big Titty Pirate Lady. So in my notes, I would write shit like, Buggy and Big Titty Pirate Lady find a ship. Buggy and Big Titty Baddie come across fucked up Moji and Kabaji. And of course, a triumphant pose of Buggy and his crew with the Big Titty Pirate Lady. So when this reveal happened that she was actually Lady Alvida, I just about broke my jaw with the face I made. There was no way in hell Alvida with the body by Velveeta was showing up looking like that. Like, what the fuck, man? Those cover stories also showed us that Captain Morgan is going to be a thing. Take all this together with the arrival of Buggy, and man, I was wrong. I was fucking wrong. Though at least in the case of Buggy, him coming back seemed the most reasonable to me, but I did not see Alvida and Morgan coming back, like, ever. Like I said earlier, you cannot let your guard down around Oda. I'm super thankful that Mugi gave me the heads up to pay attention to the cover page stories, because this really paid off in the short amount of time that they've been a thing. But yeah, Alvida showing up after all this time with the power of the slip fruit was not something I would have seen coming in a million years. Buggy and Alvida share this team up in an attempt to execute Luffy, which leads to one of the coolest moments in the first 100 chapters. Buggy asks Luffy if he has any last words, to which Luffy yells, "I am going to be the king of the pirates." And with the raise of Buggy's sword, Luffy laughs in the face of death, only to be saved when lightning strikes Buggy's blade, freeing Luffy and giving him his second chance at life. Like the quote from Gold Roger said, "These things cannot be stopped. An inherited strength of will, one's dreams, the ebb and flow of the ages. As long as people hunger for freedom, these things will exist." He's right. And the mayor was right. Being king of the pirates isn't Luffy's far-fetched fantasy. It's his destiny. And if there was ever a sign, this was it. When Smoker sees that Luffy simply laughed in the face of death, he knew that Luffy was no ordinary pirate, and I think this fueled him more than anything to pursue the Straw Hats. He's witnessing the second coming of Roger, and he's going to do everything in his power to stop it. In the midst of the storm taking over the city, Luffy and crew escape. Luffy almost doesn't escape the wrath of Smoker, but luckily he's saved by a cloaked figure with wind abilities, Dragon. I can't wait to learn more about him. Zoro gets into a small skirmish with Tashigi, but instead ends up being the most extreme case of deja vu. Tashigi gives a speech that is very similar in nature to what Kuina said to Zoro all those years ago. Zoro snaps and talks about how much she reminds him of Kuina. Tashigi informs him that she's going to take his sword eventually. Loguetown. It's about saying goodbye to the past and preparing for the new future. New enemies, the birth of new rivalries, and a welcome to a new group of friends ready to challenge the world. As Luffy and crew set sail for the Grand Line, they take a moment to double down on their dreams as a pledge to each other. Luffy, to be the king of the pirates. Sanji, to find the All Blue. Zoro, to become the greatest swordsman. Nami, to draw a map of the world. And Usopp is just a dude who wants to be brave. Usopp admittedly has the weakest goal of the crew, but I'm hoping to see him develop more and create larger ambitions for himself. For a dude who lives to tell tall tales, he surprisingly has the smallest ego. Speaking of ego, I think it's time we talk about this review's asshole of the week. This week's asshole is no other than Nezumi. That's right, we're talking about that stupid rodent fuck. I know I cooked Mary in the first video, but he looks like an Avengers level hero compared to this absolute scumfuck. Nezumi is the embodiment of corruption. turning on the people who need him and allowing them to be extorted just so he can get his palm greased with Arlong's blood money. Nezumi couldn't even take this L with pride. He cried like a little bitch boy back to Navy HQ so he could get a bounty set on Luffy. Seriously, who the fuck does that? The worst part is that this is really setting up for the Navy to be some untrustworthy fucks. I thought pirates were a topic of nuance, but clearly I guess the Navy is going that route too. Nezumi is just pissed that he'll never ever accomplish anything close to what Luffy and the crew did in Arlong Park. He wants to just skate along with his shitty budget for Sona and act like he's the boss. Nezumi is a catch-all for rodents in Japanese, but if anything this dude aligns with the rat. Too shitty to do anything good and too cowardly to do anything bad for himself. He will never succeed and I hope someone sets some traps for his dumb ass. Seriously, fuck you Nezumi. Luffy and crew could have easily killed Nezumi and blamed it on Arlong and no one would have given a fuck, but they let him off easy and he spit in their face. At least it did serve for a plot device, but the point still stands, he fucking sucks. Rotten hell Nezumi, you great value Mickey Mouse. And that concludes this review's Asshole of the Week. Can't wait to see what dumb fucks wait ahead for me on the Grand Line. Now it's time for expectations and predictions. I still expect the Grand Line to be a rude awakening for the Straw Hats, but I'm glad now that Luffy actually thinks it's a good idea that they get a doctor in the crew. I can't wait to see a fight where Zoro is full strength instead of getting nerfed into the ground with massive wounds 24/7. From Veratier on, this is all content that is brand new to me, so I really don't know what to expect. I already thought characters wouldn't come back, and now I'm wondering if we're going to see Kuro again. I really want to see the other 7 Warlords of the Sea, and from the interaction between Mihawk and Shanks, I almost wonder if he's a warlord or may become a warlord. And we're getting closer to Alabasta, which I can't wait. On that note, I think we can get ready to set sail for review number 3, chapters 101 to 154, Reverse Mountain to Drum Island. Until next time, I'll see you on the Grand Line, and remember, don't get your feet wet.